Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I will be your host for today. And it's hard to believe that 3 weeks has flown by so fast. We're on the final day of our ocean plastic events. We've been visiting with scientists, explorers, adventurers, conservationists, artists, advocates, research groups from all over the world, and learning about what's happening with this important issue, what it's doing to the environment, and then more importantly, learning about the people who are fighting every day to try and find solutions to this global issue. So I'm really excited to carry on with events for today. We've got Nikkey joining us. She's a photographer with a passion for documenting the environment. As voyage photographer aboard Expedition North Pacific Leg 2, her mission was to capture making the unseen seen. So with a background in digital marketing, she also took on sharing the day-to-day experience at sea and engaging social media followers in the microplastic issues. So we've been lucky enough to host, I'd say, about 4 or 5 other expedition members who have traveled around the ocean documenting what they're seeing with microplastics. So Nikkey, it's so great to have you joining us today. We're excited to hear your perspective and especially see some of your photos from the journey.
Awesome, thank you. And thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm very excited there are this many of you that want to learn about ocean plastics. So I'm just gonna take a second here to share my screen. I'll start the presentation. Is that looking good?
All right, we got it full screen.
Perfect. So over the summer, I spent 8 days at sea off the west coast of Canada documenting this microplastic research trip through photography. And this trip in particular was really meaningful to me because I actually live on the west coast of Canada. So I was getting a chance to see firsthand how big the issue is where I live. And growing up on this coast, it's where I learned how to swim and paddle and do all the ocean sports that I love. And one of those is free diving. And free diving, if you haven't heard of it, is like scuba diving, except you hold your breath. So there's no tanks. And because of this, it means that you're able to go up and down frequently, whereas a scuba diver has to stay on the bottom. And it makes freedivers very useful for ocean cleanups. So I started getting involved with my local freediving club in doing underwater cleanups. And I remember the first one I did, it was at a popular pier and beach in Vancouver. And I was absolutely shocked at what we found. Looking under the water, there was everything from small pieces of plastic and bottles, people's sunglasses, fishing lines, to larger items like plastic chairs and car parts and a hot water tank. And it really showed me that people were still treating the ocean as a garbage dump. And this was so surprising to me because we're a coastal community and we're so aware of the creatures that live here. And I just thought that we knew there was no way already, but it showed me that there was a lot of work to be done still. And so since then, I've been trying to be really involved in ocean stewardship and helping educate people on how they can make more sustainable lifestyle choices. But a part of me as a photographer always wanted to showcase this issue I'm passionate about through what I do for work. So when I heard about Expedition, I was like, this is perfect. It's how I can put my professional skills to use for my passion. And so there's 14 of us from all different backgrounds that came on this journey. We covered 283 nautical miles with the one mission, which was to make the unseen seen. So this is Expedition's slogan, and it doesn't just apply to the microplastics in the ocean, but also to the toxins in our body that are coming from these plastics that end up in the food chain. So I signed up. I had only sailed a handful of times previously to this, and certainly never overnight. So I was a little bit nervous about the bad weather we might hit off the west coast of Vancouver Island, which we did. But that's the thing when you're passionate about something, any fear or nerves kind of melt away and your passion trumps that. And for me, when I have my camera, I'm so focused on documenting what we're seeing and the issue at hand that I get into another zone entirely and don't even worry about it anymore. And it helped that our professional crew was amazing and made us feel confident in our boat's abilities at all times. So our route was from Vancouver to the Southern Gulf Islands. We anchored overnight at Prevost Island, and then we went around the bottom of Vancouver Island all the way about halfway up the west coast to Broken Island Group, and we stopped at Benson Island. And then we went back south to Victoria and then to Seattle via the San Juan Islands. So this is what that looked like on a map. And you can see we had a little detour in Port Angeles. That's where you stop in to do your border and passport stuff. But also we had a snap steering cable right when we were off the coast of Port Angeles, and we were in the fog in the middle of a shipping channel. So our Coast Guard friends came and gave us a tow so that our crew could fix it in calm waters rather than out at sea. So while we were out there, we performed 5 different types of sampling, but the main one was using this manta trawler. And all the sampling we did with the manta trawler follows something called the 5 gyres protocol. So you can see the mouth of it is about 1/2 meter wide, and we put it in the water for 30 minutes. And then all the microplastics or anything really will collect in that long net that trails off the back. And then we wash that net out through a 3-layered sieve and then pick out any pieces of plastic and put them into a vial. And then later we would look at the samples under the microscope, which we could then separate microplastics from microfibers, which are small synthetic fibers that are also plastic, and then take out anything organic that we might have put in there thinking it was plastic as well. So this sample we took was actually in the Georgia Strait, which if we go back to the map, it's that body of water between the mainland of BC and Vancouver Island. And these samples are still being confirmed, but roughly based on what we think we found there, I can estimate that there's 20 million pieces of microplastic in this body of water alone. And that is a rough estimate. In order for that to be more accurate, we would have had to sample different places within the Georgia Strait, but it does give us some kind of idea of the scope of the problem. So we know that 8 million tons of plastic is going into the ocean every year, but what we don't know is where it's all going and where it's all coming from. So the sampling that we do is actually on the surface of the water, but this time, this voyage, we actually did another one that was also pulling up sediment samples because scientists are now wondering what we're finding on the surface isn't accounting for it all. So is it going to different spots in the water column, and is some of it sinking? So that was on the very left-hand side here. You can see the claw-like contraption that our scientist Imogen is holding, and that was the one we did for the sediment ocean floor. So there are a few ways that plastic actually ends up in the ocean. And one of those is, you know, people littering directly in the ocean or into streams and rivers. Another is through industry, so corporations with bad waste management practices, and then waste management companies as well, if there's spills or if they're near waterways that plastic can get into. And then a more surprising way is actually through our own laundry. So anytime we wash our synthetic clothes, which are things like nylon and polyester, so think fleeces or any kind of athletic clothing that's stretchy, there's tons of these little pieces that break off in the wash, and those get washed out through our wastewater to the ocean. And they are essentially plastic. And that is what we were finding a lot off the coast of Vancouver because, of course, there is such a large population. And then another way that plastic can end up in the ocean is from countries around the world, if they're like small island communities and maybe plastic has only been introduced to their lives in the last couple decades and they just simply don't have an infrastructure to recycle. And then there's storm events and tsunamis. So when large bodies of water wash up into the land and then bring stuff back out with it. So it really just drives home that this is a global issue. We visited Benson Island in the Broken Island group, and this island was home to the Seychelles Nation for thousands of years, but is now uninhabited. And it's in a national park, so you would expect it to be pristine. But what we found was that it's not. We did a cleanup on the windward side of this island, and we found everything from fishing gear, large and small pieces of styrofoam, to things like discarded flip-flops and a bunch of water bottles. And these water bottles we were finding had writing on it in languages from around the world. So we knew they had come from Russia, North America, China, Japan, and it was such a good example for us that, plastic knows no borders. So even if your country starts putting in bans, like we really all need to work together in order to start solving and reducing the issue. So this area of the coast is also where we started to see really rich zooplankton. So zooplankton is tiny little life forms, sea creatures in their first stages of life, and they drift around within the plankton. They did kind of give us a problem because the density meant that our water filters were clogged and none of us could shower for a few days, but that's life on a boat. So seeing the microplastics mixed in here with the tiny pieces of zooplankton, it became really easy for us to see how fish might get confused and eat plastic along with the little creatures that they actually want to eat. And a couple of days later, we came across this pod of orcas. And orcas are at the top of the food chain here. And what that means is that they are most impacted by bioaccumulation and biomagnification. So if a small fish eats a bunch of plastic, and some of that might not get passed through, it might not be able to digest it, or even if it does, it's still absorbing some of those harmful chemicals. And then so a larger fish comes along and say it eats 5 of those tiny fish, then it's got that buildup with inside it. So by the time an orca or a dolphin or a seal comes along and eats a bunch of those fish, it's only going to get a bigger issue up the chain. So these orcas are southern resident killer whales. And that means that they stick around the coast and we kind of monitor them and we can compare their health. So they have been tested with their bloodstream, and when they are compared to the northern residents, which don't live around coastal communities as much, our southern residents have 4 times more toxins in their bodies. So this is largely due to our own degradation of their habitat. And in these plastics and the chemicals that are coming from them is something called an endocrine disruptors. And that means that they mess with our hormonal systems, not only in animals, but also in humans. And it can cause problems with fertility and birth defects and more. So if you guys heard about the orca in BC over the summer who was carrying around her dead calf, that she was a southern resident killer whale. So they're facing a lot of issues here at the moment. So being visited by these whales really reminded us what we were doing out here and the importance of our everyday actions. These whales came over to inspect our boat and they wanted to check us out, and you could really just see the intelligence and the curiosity there, and how we're more like them than we think. So I think this really re-energized us all. And you can see on the side here, that's what some of our samples look like. So off the West Coast, the sample on the right is more what we were seeing. Things have really broken down into tiny, tiny pieces. And the sample next to it with the bigger piece of rope and plastic is from leg one of this trip that went through the Pacific garbage patch. And that's where they were finding those bigger pieces. So this is all of us from leg two. This is at the end of the trip in Seattle. We came from all different backgrounds, different countries, skill sets. In this group, we've got an anthropologist, we have scientists, we have sustainability experts, our professional sailors, filmmakers, a BBC presenter, an actress, and me, the photographer. So we were chosen for different backgrounds because Emily, the co-founder of X Expedition, she recognizes that there's not going to be one solution to this plastic problem. It's going to be all of us coming together with our different skill sets and finding a ton of different solutions and putting those all together. And that's where we're going to see progress. So this is what Emily calls our superpower. And as a photographer and someone who works in digital marketing, I know the power of storytelling through words and images. So as Joe mentioned, one of my jobs on the boat was to post about our daily experiences on social media. And this allowed our followers, like thousands of people from around the world, were learning what we were learning at the same time. And when you're a photographer, you know that images have the power to make people feel and want to change. So my job is in the moment to check in with myself and saying, how is this making me feel? And how can I take a photo in a way that's someone around the world is going to see this and feel the same way I felt in this moment and feel as moved to make changes in their lives. So that's where I can really connect with my superpower. And now these images that we took from this leg are going to go around the world. They're going to be seen in magazines, on the internet, through blogs and social media, and presentations. And so that's going to change, hopefully, a lot of people's minds about how they're using plastic as single-use and throwaway items. So even though previous to this I had no sailing experience, and I'm definitely not a scientist, I still found a way to get involved and put something towards working on this problem. So today, I want to ask all of you to start thinking about what your superpower is and how you can put it to use in solving our plastic problem.
All right, Nikkey. Well, thanks so much for sharing your experience aboard the Sea Dragon. It looks like it was an incredible experience. It looks like it was lots of fun. It looks like there would have been hard parts when you're seeing those beautiful remote islands, but they're finding those beaches with plastic from all over the world. So it looks like there's probably a mixture of emotions during the journey.
Certainly.
All right. And I love those two slogans. The first one being make the unseen seen, because I think that's so important, especially for landlocked classrooms who are maybe further from the ocean and don't get to see the problem all the time, but also need to realize that the ocean is a part of our everyday, even if we live far from it. And I really like the finding your own superpower, that you don't have to be a scientist. Filmmakers, artists, teachers, it takes all kinds to get the word out and to make a difference. So thank you so much for sharing that message, Nikkey.
No problem.
All right, well, let's meet some classrooms. So let's start off, let's see, let's go to North Palm Beach in Florida with Mr. Lavogue. He's got some students with him. Let me turn their microphone on.
Wait, Hi, Nikkey. All right, let's ask. Okay, so Journey, do you have a question? Who's got a question?
I have Jude.
Jude? Where's Jude?
Come here. Over here.
Jude, come up and ask your question for Nikkey, please. Hang on, Nikkey. We got a lot of kids that wanted to see you. So our classroom's more crowded than normal. Jude, come up. There you go. We'll go this way. There you go, Jude. Go ahead and ask Nikkey your question.
Hi, Jude.
There you go.
Hi. Why did you get the passion to study microplastic or plastic in the ocean?
I grew up always really loving the ocean because I live right on it. So I've always been, seeing seals and whales and dolphins here. And once I learned how microplastics were not only affecting us, but affecting the animals as well, I think that's where I started getting really passionate because they don't have the ability to change us or speak up for themselves.
All right, great question to get us started. Our next classroom, well, I'm going to give a shout out to them first. So we have Mrs. Green's class is joining us from Toronto, Ontario. They're grade 4-5s. Now, the microphone's not working today, but we can still see your screen. So wave like crazy and we'll pretend we hear the loud sound. There we go.
Hi, everyone.
So when you're ready, I'll keep an eye out on the chat sidebar and we'll take some of your questions. But for now, let's go to, let's go to Mrs. Legault's class. They're joining us from Barrie, Ontario, here in Canada, grade 6s, and I'll turn their microphone on. We'll see how they're doing. How we doing, grade 6?
Hi. Okay, do you have a question, Amber? Go ahead. Very loud.
How much plastic did you find?
So in about one of those little sample jars that I showed you guys a picture of, we would find approximately 8 to 15 pieces of microplastic in that one sampling. But then we did other kinds of tests, which we were looking for nanoplastics, which are too tiny to see with our naked eye. So we don't know how many of those we found yet because the results are still being analyzed by the scientists.
All right. And I think this would be a good time just to add in that, we think that because the plastic's getting smaller and smaller, maybe it's breaking down, but actually it's just breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. It's not actually disappearing or going anywhere. So it is still in our oceans and still causing a lot of trouble. And I'm sure you guys talked loads about that on the journey.
Yes. Never goes away chemically.
That's right. So I think, yeah, we do. So I've got a question from Mrs. Green's class in Toronto, and they're wondering, what was the strangest piece of plastic you encountered on the journey?
Well, there's two items that really stick out for me. One, when we were on Benson Island, we saw, it was like, it looked like it could have been part of a plane or a ship. It was like some kind of plastic instruction that would have been in a manual. And then another thing that I didn't actually know what it was at the time, but found out through a different program, was plastic bullet shell casings. And we found quite a few of those, and they almost look like when you play badminton, like a birdie. So yeah, that was probably the weirdest one.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing when you told the story as well that in along the shores of, say, Vancouver and Washington, you were finding plastics from all the way on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, all the way from Asia, like Japan and China and Russia. It's amazing. And maybe I would cite to them, but then it washes somewhere else and it's someone else's problem. So it really doesn't go away.
No.
All right. Well, great questions so far. Let's go to Mrs. Wagoda's group. They're joining us in Brantford, Ontario, grade 5 students. Let me turn their microphone on. How are we doing, grade 5s?
Hi, everyone.
All right, who's got a question?
Okay. Right here. I'm just sitting here.
Go ahead.
got a little stage right there.
How much plastic pieces did you find?
Sorry, one more time?
How much plastic did you find in the ocean?
How much did we find?
Yeah.
So like I was saying, in the small vials, we would find anywhere from about 8 to 15 pieces at a time. But we won't know for sure until we get all of those results back from the scientists, including the nanoplastics.
Just building on that, you weren't just sampling in the ocean, you were sampling from the air as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So we don't know how that test is going to go. We were given a bucket to sample the air, and the scientists we were doing it for wanted it to be placed at the front of the boat, but we couldn't do that without interfering with our ability to sail, and that was important. So we had to put it at the back of the boat, which means we could have been contaminating that sample. So what we had to do was do our best to wear non-shedding clothing, so it wouldn't be microfibers coming off of our own clothes that would go into it. But every so often we would take the bucket down and then wash it out with water to collect anything, because again, it's too small for us to see, and then put bottles in there and collect the water up and date and everything. So it'll be interesting to see what comes back.
Yeah, and that's it's actually a little bit of a scary thought. You think about it maybe in the water, but potentially the fibers are so small and light that in some cases we're breathing them in. So
yes,
another reason why we want to try and figure out a way to limit and reduce our use of plastics. All right, let's see, who haven't we visited yet? Mrs. Pearson's grade 4-3s in Calgary, Alberta. Let me turn their microphone on. How we doing, Calgary?
Hi.
Hi. Have you ever got seasick?
I did not get seasick, thankfully, but quite a few of my crew members did. I think 2 of them had never even been on a boat before this trip, so they probably got it the worst. But one of the tricks we learned, if you do ever get seasick, if you stand at the helm and steer the boat, because you'll be looking at the horizon, that helps you feel a lot better.
All right. And you didn't document any of that seasickness, did you?
No.
Okay, that's good. All right, good question. Let's see. Let's go to Marlton, New Jersey. We've got Mrs. Cruslow's group joining us, grade 4s. Let me turn their microphone on. How are we doing, grade 4?
How are you
All
doing?
right. Who's got a question?
What inspired you?
I think what inspired me was going back to seeing the plastic in the ocean in the first place, and just knowing how much I love the ocean and how lucky we are to have healthy, well, we were to have healthy oceans, and I want them to be healthy for future generations.
And then what about being on the ship and meeting so many women from so many different backgrounds? Did anything kind of strike you from that?
Yeah, well, I mean, Imogen Napper is, once we learned about her, we were all a little starstruck that her research has led to these sweeping microplastic bans. And she really has the skill to make science understandable for non-scientific people. Which was awesome, because I feel like we walked away with such a better understanding thanks to her. But everyone there was super inspiring, and not only just in what they brought in terms of skills, but also in terms of optimism and positive attitude, and really just having that passion that we can solve this problem and we're not going to give up and we're all going to work together.
All right, and Imogen is great. We hosted her, when would it have been? Late last week, and so it was great to learn a little bit more about her research, and she's really focusing right now on what's coming off of our clothes, especially our polyesters, and then getting into our waterways. So really interesting research going forward, and I think that's one of the scariest things about this issue is we don't know a lot yet. We're still figuring things out. So it's really important that we're doing all this research and all this learning. So really lucky that you got to go on this journey. And then there's another group you mentioned, Surfrider, that you get to work with from time to time. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, so Surfrider is unique in they work on both ends of the problem. So one of their main goals is to do beach cleanups. So they're trying to restore the coastline and habitats around that. So they do everything from public beaches that are popular, like around Vancouver, we did Granville Island, to everywhere like remote beaches, like how I was showing you guys Benson Island. There's some other islands just a bit more north of that. And I did a cleanup for 4 days with them, and we found over 700 water bottles, again, on an uninhabited island. And we filled a bunch of like big super sacks. And a lot of what we were finding there was single-use plastics, as well as just irresponsible fishing practices and gear that had come from that. So think like tires packed full of styrofoams that had been used as floats. So Surfrider then takes this data that they find from the cleanup and then goes back into the community and says, okay, where is this coming from? And what bans can we work on with our council or like legislatively so that this stops happening?
All right. And I forgot to mention, any classrooms who are viewing live on YouTube, there is a chat sidebar on the right of the YouTube screen. Let us know where you're watching from, and we can sneak in a question or two. But let's swing back and visit some of our live classrooms again for our second round. So going back to Mrs. Green's class in Toronto, let's see, they've got a couple questions here. Let's go. I wonder if you know, if you talked about this, how much plastic on average does a person throw away each year?
Ooh, I don't know the answer to that, but
it probably depends a lot on where you are.
Number.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's probably really depends on where you are, I'd imagine.
Yes.
Yeah.
What access you have to alternatives.
Yeah. Well, let's expand on that. And then when you got onto that that beach in the Broken Islands, how did it make you feel when you saw plastic in a national park in summer that was so should have been so pristine?
It's heartbreaking. It's just really sad to see an environment, especially that, like it's so remote and so beautiful. And then you look down and you're finding these pieces of plastic, and it makes you feel a bit ashamed to be human, and that we are doing this to not only our habitat, but animals' habitats as well. But at that same time, it's like, okay, well, it is humans doing this. We're human, like we can change our behavior. So it's kind of both upsetting and empowering that there is a solution.
Yeah, and I think that's the great thing that's come out of the last 3 weeks is we've heard a lot of stories, a lot of negative things, but I think we've heard just as much stories of people getting out, doing things, changing their habits, and making an impact. So it's really good to hear the good stories too once in a while.
Yes.
Let's go back to Mr. Laveau's group in Florida. You guys have another question?
Yes, we do. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Haley, and I'm in 3rd grade. What is freediving, and how deep can you go?
Well, it is a sport. Do you know what scuba diving is? So it's like scuba diving, except your fins are longer so that when you kick, you're using less oxygen, so you can hold your breath for longer because you don't have a tank. You're just holding your breath. And around here, I only ever go around the 10 to 15 meter range because that's kind of where all the life is to see stuff. But I think the record for Canada for the deepest woman is 62 meters.
Pretty impressive on one breath. That's some good control. And I have a friend, his name's William Winram, if you want to look him up afterwards, and he can hold his breath for 9 minutes, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. I think the average person can do 30 seconds to a minute without training. So pretty wild. How long can you hold your breath for?
4 minutes.
Oh, nice.
But that's not very good in the free diving world. That's like, okay.
A pretty good start. Okay, let's go to Ms. Legault's group again. Your microphone's on.
Okay, Cohen?
What can we do to change all this plastic in the ocean?
So there's a lot we can all do. And one of those things is to stop using single-use plastics altogether. So things like plastic bags or straws, any kind of plastic that its life cycle is over very soon. Plastic is this great material when used properly because it does last forever. So something like in an airplane, but then we've taken this material that doesn't break down and used it for things that we throw away after maybe 10 minutes of use. So to stop really using all those items and to think about it, even if you are grocery shopping with your parents and you're at the store, just even starting to become more aware of how much plastic is around you that is maybe unnecessary. And then doing things like if you're out and you see that there's plastic litter on the ground, just carrying a little bag with you and gloves to pick it up and making sure it doesn't get into our waterways.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point to bring up, that single-use plastics and all those things. There was an analogy brought up earlier in the week with a bathtub. If your bathtub was overflowing, would you just mop the water on the floor or would you turn the tap off? And I think that's what we really need to do, is turn that tap off, stop using it as much. And then I think we're going to start seeing more of a difference. So Mrs. Pearson's class, your microphone is on again.
Yeah.
Why do people pollute the ocean?
I think that people have this mindset that once they can't see it, it goes away. It's not a problem anymore. And I don't know if people do it because it's maybe for them it's easier than having to deal with their trash, or if they just simply are unaware of the impact they're causing.
And I think it comes to that slogan again, the making the unseen seen. You know, when things wash into the ocean, or if you're on a small island and you don't have a choice but to put things close to the ocean, then it disappears. You don't always see that big impact. So sometimes it's accidental. Mrs. Cruzlow, your microphone is back on.
All right, go ahead. Quickly.
What was your favorite part when you were on the ship?
Definitely seeing the orcas. There was a little baby in the group, and it kept practicing its breaching, so when they jump out of the water. And it was really cute because, you know, when you see like a big orca breach and it's kind of majestic and graceful, but this little baby would just go plop. And it was adorable, and it was practicing its tail slaps, and just in the way that they wanted to come over and look at us and interact with us was really neat.
All right, and we'll visit Mrs. Wagoda's group one more time. I'll turn your microphone on. All right, we're ready if you have another question.
When you were free diving, did you find anything with high value?
No, I wish. No, it's mostly stuff that needs to be recycled or disposed of properly.
All right, and then on that free diving question, another question did come in via the chat bar, wondering about some of the marine life you see when you free dive.
Oh, so here in BC, we see everything from little tiny crabs called kelp crabs to big crabs, rockfish, lingcod, seals, sea lions. I've never seen a harbor porpoise, any porpoises or dolphins while under the water, but they are around. We have quite a few seals locally that they're very curious, and because the visibility can be poor here, sometimes you turn around and you're face to face with one.
All right. So Nikkey, you spent a lot of time documenting on board the Sea Dragon. How many photos do you think you came away with at the end of the expedition?
Oh my gosh, I'm still editing them. I think I came out probably 1,000. It's 8 days of shooting nonstop. And because every time you pull up a sample, you don't know what you're going to find in that one. So like you feel like there's never something you can't capture just in case. So yeah, it was constantly being on.
All right. Well, classrooms, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. As per usual, your questions were awesome. And we love that you're taking an interest in ocean plastics and have been joining our events. And Nikkey, a huge thanks to you, not only for hanging out with us today, but also doing something with your photography to try and raise awareness to what's happening.
Thank you for having me. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
All right, let's turn on the microphones, boys and girls. Feel free to get loud, and then we'll sign off for today. So.
Hang on, go.
All right. Excellent job. And I'm looking at Mrs. Green's class, and I think they're being loud too.
Looks like it.
All right. Well, again, there they go. Thanks, everybody. We've got one more ocean plastics event today, and then next month we're going to be celebrating coral reefs. So we'll learn a lot about climate change, the beauty of coral, and what's going on around the world. So Nikkey, again, thank you so much. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you on another Hangout.
All right. Bye.